Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Jackson Crawford. Today, on my Patreon-supported channel about Norse language, myth, and runes, I want to talk about the Icelandic Rune Poem, which is often presented online and in popular books as if it were a more cohesive and an older text than it really is. Now, in 2018, I made a video about the old Norwegian rune poem, which is a more cohesive and an older text. Now, if you missed that video, you can find my video about that on my same free channel. The old Icelandic rune poem is preserved in, well, the two oldest manuscripts are one from 1500, which is basically unreadable now. That one is cataloged as AM687D. The text that I'm going to base my reading off of in this video is about 50 years later, about 1550. At any rate, the context is Protestant. If you remember that the first Protestant translation of the New Testament into Icelandic is from 1540, we're in a pretty early Lutheran Iceland in this case. That's from AM 461. Note also, anyway, that is closer to us than it is to the Viking Age. So, people trying to use these as sources for Viking Age and certainly pre-Christian myth are, well, they have their work cut out for them. I also want to point out, before getting into this, you can get the text from both of these manuscripts, as well as some later paper manuscripts, which might have some independent source value, although I don't see much in them, in a book called simply The Icelandic Rune Poem by a well-known 20th century runologist, R.I. Page, which is free to download at the website of the Viking Society for Northern Research, where you can also find some other great resources that are free to download, like Fawkes and Barnes' New Introduction to Old Norse, Fawkes' translation of the Prose Edda, and his edition of the Prose Edda in Old Norse, etc. I have no affiliation with that organization. They probably don't know I exist, but those are free resources you should know about. They are still, for whatever reason, free as of January 2023. So let's get into the text of the Icelandic Rune Poem as preserved in AM 461. All right, and one more time, thanks very much to my Patreon supporters, who are the people who allow me to do this as a job. All right, so in AM 461, we have little, kennings to help you remember the names of 15 of the 16 younger Futhark runes. This manuscript leaves out the very last rune, and the text about the very last rune is unreadable in the other old manuscript, AM687D, and the early paper manuscripts don't agree on a single reading that allow us to really guess what it would have been in AM 461. One thing that you notice looking at these different manuscripts and at the paper manuscripts is that there's not a single, I don't think it's possible to establish that there is, a single old Icelandic rune poem text, like the kind that you're going to find online or in popular books. The different manuscripts are just too different from each other, but this is the best one from Iceland, so let's see what it says. Fe Actually, this is so close to modern Icelandic, I'll just read it with modern Icelandic pronunciation. Fé frændarog og firða gaman og graf þvein. So fé, money, is slander, dissension, conflict among kinsmen, and joy of men, and who knows what graf þvein could possibly be. And 687D, it says graf seiths gata, grav, and then something like Vitnir or Volother or Thvenger often means snake, so this could be like the path of a snake. That could be an allusion to something like the myth of Fafnir in the Volsunga Saga, right, the dragon that lies on the treasure, but it's not clear that's what's even meant by graf þvein in this manuscript. Skía grátur og skárargs gata þórir og hirðis hattur síð furull segur. So meaning something like a light rain, is the weeping, the tears of clouds. And then the skárargs gata looks like maybe something like the gravseiths gata of 687D, which is for F, but just impossible for me to make a good guess about what this would mean. Or the Thorir, or it looks like it could say Thoris. Is this the darer or something? There's just a hopeless mess here. And here this Hatur, the hated thing of the, like the sheep herder, right? Because he wants to be dry while he's out in the mountains herding his sheep. And then the Síð furull segur, it's like the knot, or like the man who's out late, like the late traveling man. What that has to do with anything here is mysterious. Refer to my video, You're Right versus I'm Wrong, for if you're thinking that I sound like an idiot for not being able to understand this. If you have alternative explanations, what are your justifications for those alternative explanations? Because the plain text of the manuscript is anything but plain. Also notice the name of this rune, means slag, like a byproduct of the smithing process in the Old Norwegian rune poem. So it doesn't agree between the Icelandic and the Norwegian, and it doesn't agree in the Old English one either, because the Old English rune poem, this means the aurochs, right, the ancient bull. Thors kvenna kvöld og kletta íbúi og. So it looks like there's a third thing that's being left out here, but this is at least easier to read. The giant, the monster, is the torment of women, and the dweller in cliffs or rocks, and something. That's another one that's different in the Old English rune poem, where, of course, the letter is called thorn. Ás aldin gautur og áskards jöfur og valhallar vísir. So God, a pagan god, this is the singular of the word Aesir, like plural gods, is an aged god, or Gautur is often just a term for Odin, and clearly Odin is what's meant here based on the other two kennings, the prince of Asgard, right, where the gods live, and the prince or ruler of Valhall, his hall, Valhalla. This is another rune that's named differently in the Old Norwegian rune poem, where it's Os, Rivermouth, which is reflects a later development of the vowel value of this letter from the long A to a long O on the Scandinavian continent. It's interesting, there's so many different meanings to runes in the very first ones between the English, Icelandic, and Norwegian. I wonder if that's because more people would remember the earlier rune names, and so there'd just be more opportunities for the telephone game of what the runes mean to develop, just because it's on more lips. Reið sitjandi sæla og snúðlig ferð og Jórs erfiði. So a ride is the joy of the sitting one, right? This one's kind of funny, and the twisting journey and the horse's difficulty. So the rider is happy, the horse is having a hard time, right? Because you're riding on the horse. It's kind of funny, at least. You would actually expect the genitive of the old archaic word for horse, yor, to just be yos without this r, which suggests this is not a natural part of the vocabulary of the person recording this in the 1500s. Coin barna bull or bardai or hushold fua. So a boil, right, like a pimple or blister or something, is the bane of children and a battle and a house of rotting flesh. Hard to know what the battle part has to do with anything. Hagar kalda korn og knappa driva og snauka sátt. So hail is the cold corn and the snowfall of a servant, if this is 1 pea, or of a knob, if this is 2 peas. It's still hard to know what on earth this could mean, or what it could have to do with hail. I mean, driva, snowfall, does, but what are the other ones? And the sickness of snakes, or worms, potentially. Anyway, cold-blooded animals might get sick when it hails, sure. Nøyd þujar þrá og vera erfið. So, need, emergency, is the struggle of a serving woman and a, like, crosswise, athwart difficulty. Hard to tell what the point of this one is either. Ís ár burgur og unnar þak og feiks mans fora. So ice is the bark of a river. It's points for a poetic image there. And a wave's roof, same thing. And a doomed man's danger. This one I like, right? This one is, it's cohesive, it's coherent. More work was done on this one than on some of the other letters. Ár gumna gleði og something sumar og vel flest það vill. So year, or really harvest is what's meant here, is the joy of men, and something summer, and then, well, all that which one wants. That's pretty weak. Sól skía skjöldur og skínandi röðull og ísa aldurtrei. So the sun is the shield of the clouds and a shining red thing. The sun is red in Old Norse, by the way, something I've worked on, discovered is pretty consistent in my studies of colors in Old Norse. And the danger to the life of ice. All right, that was all right. It's a B, right? If East was an A, sun is a B for me in terms of if I'm grading these. Tyr ein hendur ás og úlfs leifur friggjar faðir. So Tyr is the one-handed god, or one of the Aesir, and the remnant of the wolf, what's left behind by the wolf, reference to the wolf, of course, biting off his hand, saying this being referred to in the first kinning there, and the father of Frigg. There might be something in the Prose Edda when Snorri is just sort of throwing everything at the wall when he identifies Tyr as Frigg's father. I don't remember that. It's certainly not in any of the old poems, though. I would not say that is a canon Viking Age understanding, but it's a nice alliteration for Gjarfadir. Bjarka blómgat tre og lítil hrísla og í ást sæmiliks vidar. So birch is a bloomed tree and a little twig, and in love of an ornamental or like honorable or attractive wood or tree, something like that. I can't give this a very high grade. M reminds me of my favorite one in the Old Norwegian rune poem. Maður mans gaman og moldar auki og skipa skreitir. So man is a man's joy. Of course, it's also from a stanza in Havamal, perhaps has an earlier origin than any of these poems. And an augmentation of soil and an ornamenter of ships. In the old Norwegian rune poem, I believe it goes something like Maður moldar auki mikil greip av hauki, right? So man is an augmentation of the soil, and the hawk's grip is great, which just is so Robinson Jeffers to me. But of course, it's the old Norwegian rune poem, which is more coherent than most of this one. And then Lugur Vetlandi Vimur og Vidur Ketzik og Glumga Gnøið. So lake or sea is a swelling river and a wide kettle and some kind of fish's rustling noise. Surely something has gone wrong in the transmission here. I think other manuscripts have grun, so like a fish's ground, which at least makes sense as a kinning, and then the oldest manuscript that's mostly incoherent or unreadable, AM687D, has glumnunga grandi, which would mean fish's shore, which, you know, probably makes more sense than fish's rustling noise, but clearly something has gone wrong in the transmission of this poem along the lines, or this is just a creation in the 1500s by someone who knows some kinnings for the names of runes and is trying to assemble, you know, something in a genre or subgenre of rune poems, right? Maybe these things were passing around orally in a lot of different variants. We know, for example, Page points in his book to an old Norwegian runic inscription where a few different kinnings for runes names are used to disguise a woman's name that's spelled out with the runes that he's using kinnings for. Right, her name is Gudrun, so he has the younger Fulag runes K-U, Thorn, R-U-N. He has kinning hints for those names that are very reminiscent of the kinnings that are in the Old Norwegian or Old Icelandic Rune Poem. So potentially these things are going around more as the individual kinnings than as the entire poems. And now and then someone, like whoever compiled the content in this manuscript in the 1500s, decides, well, I will try to make, you know, a rune poem out of the kinnings for rune names that I know, and they do a better or worse job. Right, I would say the Old Norwegian Rune Poem, which is older and probably closer to a living tradition of using these runes as a means of writing inscriptions, is a much more coherent and artistically better product than the Old Icelandic Rune Poem, which is, you know, it just looks garbled. It looks like rushed or something, or like someone has half or worse remembered something, you know, heard long ago in life. Like me trying to reconstruct a Rudyard Kipling poem by memory, something like that. You know, but this is completely belied by the way that this poem is presented on websites about rune stuff or popular books about Norse mythology and runes, and I think that that's a disservice to people who need to know the actual, you know, the actual facts, the actual manuscripts and rune stones and such that we get our information from, right? I want us to scrape off the detritus both of pedants and of modern day gurus who have, you know, quote all the answers to sell you and show you what's on that bedrock underneath. And so, well, this video has been part of that project, and thank you Patreon supporters for helping me make it possible. So from up here high in the foothills of beautiful Pikes Peak country in extraordinary Colorado, please know that, again, Patreon, I'm thanking you from the bottom of my heart, and everyone out there, I'm wishing you